Welcome to Lessons from the Field, the podcast where we dig deep with restaurant industry leaders to uncover the strategies, insights, and stories behind their success. Whether it's operational excellence, guest satisfaction, or leveraging data for growth, we're here to bring you actionable lessons straight from the experts.
Hello, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us. My name is Emily Bennett. My whole career prior to Black Box was in the restaurant industry or in family entertainment. Director of marketing at Topgolf, VP of marketing at Dickey's Barbecue, and then marketing roles at some fun places here in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. And so always happy to talk with ops folks like Troy, who is the former president of Huddle House.
Thanks, Emily. I appreciate it. Thanks for the invite. I love being here with you and talking about this tool. The tool's fantastic. And like Emily, I've been in the restaurant industry my entire life. I started before I was 16. Don't tell anybody. Been doing it for a very long time. Again, grew up in operations, much like Emily. Just excited to get into it today.
Today, we're going to talk about this great data that we do have from our guest platform. This is feedback and sentiment analysis. So we bring in all of this great data and we are analyzing that data through an AI portion now. So we're just excited to be able to talk about this data. Troy is going to continue just to go back and forth with me about it, and then we'll dig into his experience. But I just want to kind of start with the data itself. So again, we're bringing in all of this great data from all of the social review sites. Do you want to talk a little bit about how you were able to dive into the insights within the platform, and how did you use the current one?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. That was actually kind of a cornerstone of how we really got the information out into the field for both our franchise teams and our company restaurants, right? So I'm guessing most of the audience is familiar with the wheel, but it was really the tool. Like, it's one thing to say, hey, your net sentiment score is 30, right? And then operators, we tend to measure things and go after scores and chase things. So we're like, oh, go get a 30, right? Yeah. Well, don't go get a 30, go fix whatever the problem is. Okay. And what we used the wheel for was really to dial into the text analytics and the red words and the green words, if you will, and kind of hone in onto those sections, both at a district level or region level or restaurant level, that really allowed us to start taking some action and start to see some trends, right? Because guest sentiments are cyclical. They change over time. So, and operators, and rightfully so, great operators and leaders are proud of what they do. So you sometimes have to fight that battle of, hey, I was just in that restaurant or I was just in that market. I didn't see that. Well, yeah, you didn't see that because that guest came before you or after you. Right. But that's what your guests are seeing, right? So yeah. The wheel is really a vehicle that really helped us do that.
I love that. And I don't think very many people are familiar with the wheel, but just a perspective, it's like it essentially is showing you kind of almost like a word cloud. And again, we're improving that from a tech stack perspective. So it's just very clear. Here are the top focus points and being able to take that down to a unit level. So your GMs can have access, which I know you did for your corporate stores. Your franchisees can have access at whatever hierarchy they specifically have with their individual or internal folks. Your field teams have access, your support centers have access, and at that roll up or that span of control perspective. So I love that you guys used it to really get into the data, because you guys saw incredible growth, which we'll get to a little bit later, incredible growth in being able to identify those key issues and work on that. And you're so right. I have never met a more competitive person than an ops person. They want to hit that number. Doesn't matter how to get there, they're going to hit that number. So the fact that you peeled that back and like really got into it is awesome. And I know that, it's not really about, it is certainly finding what that issue is. And this platform, I could speak almost from a third perspective, because I wish I had had this in my previous life, especially from a marketing person. When you have an operator, or if you have, a GM or a franchisee that wants to invest in a market or in a store, and that store is not performing well, man, I would love to have the data that goes, no, this is not what we're not going to put more money behind it.
Well, that's a great point. And I might be jumping here a little bit,
no,
Emily, that's some of the challenge to this data, right? So, or any data is believing it. Mm-hmm. Right? So we're operators, we're good operators. We're put into leadership positions, whether you're leading a brand, whether you're the CEO, the president, the general manager of the restaurant. And, if you're good at what you do, then with that comes a little ego, right? And hopefully it's a strong ego, not a big ego, but you're proud of what you do, and rightfully so, right? So you get this data and it's far too easy to celebrate success when the data is good, right? I mean, how often when the data is good do you challenge its authenticity? It's never. It just doesn't happen. We're human beings. It doesn't happen very often. But as soon as the data turns bad, I think a lot of folks' natural tendency is to go, oh, something's wrong with it. Oh, something's wrong. It's not working right, or someone's, manipulating the data. So really, whether it's the wheel or other things I'm sure we'll talk about, I think the foundation, the core to having changes like Huddle did and having changes like other brands did, is to take the data, accept it as fact, and go act on it. Right. It's got to start there, and it's got to start at the top. Otherwise, the tools are handy, but you won't maximize them.
We've had customers that have stopped using the platform because they didn't like that the numbers were bad, and you're like, this is the whole point. Like,
the point.
The opportunity to go and get the numbers to be better and drive sales and traffic because of it. And we actually have that correlation. We're able to put together what it looks like when the stores are performing perfectly or they're doing well and the guests see it. We have that correlation between the financial performance and the average star rating. And you saw that. Y'all saw your sales and traffic increase when you were able to get after those numbers.
It's hard to fundamentally argue that a well-operated restaurant or any well-operated business with high guest metrics like an average star rating isn't going to be successful. Right. It's too easy. It's too easy to ignore the ones that don't. The challenge is taking the ones that don't and getting them there.
Talk to me about showing, how did you guys use the competitive data?
Much like when the results are good, you don't question their authenticity. When stores are doing really well, those aren't the ones you focus on, right? So it really helped challenge the team, but it also helped us provide us some focus. All of us in this industry, we are constrained to some degree by resources, one of which being time. Who do you spend your time with? And what do you do?
Right.
And who do you talk to? And what initiatives do you do? And looking at these quartiles and data like this really helped us, not only from an ops perspective, focus where our field teams spent time. It validated what a lot of our leadership may have been seeing in restaurants or in markets. So now you have a validation from the guest. You tie that to the operating statements and the P&Ls, and you see this entire story and you can see this whole picture. So then you can say, okay, well, with this bucket of resources that I have as a leader, I'm going to deploy those resources to this target set of restaurants.
So tell me what you guys would do. Like, just walk me through a path of, here's the bottom quartile, and you're saying you're deploying the resources. When did you feel like the win? You were like, okay, we did it. We've completed this. Store's good. Although I think I remember you always saying it's harder to stay there than to get there. Is that your word?
Yeah. That was the side smile and the chuckle when you're asking me when we got there. You never get there, right? That goes back to an operator or leadership mentality. You never really get there, but I think what you're getting at is it's that old saying, right? We've all heard it. It's harder to stay on top than it is to get on top.
Mm-hmm.
Okay? So look, the brand has had and will continue to have, I have no doubt, great success in that sentiment across many categories. And I think we'll talk on a little bit of that, but it's really going back to that same culture, recognizing and incentivizing and then rewarding people as we make it. But to make a little finer point there, I would say I started feeling pretty good about it around about the 4th or 5th month of consistency. Okay. So, a lot of this, we have the quarterly reviews that we do, which are good, and you kind of do the quarter to quarter. And as you know, the calendar quarters were not on our fiscal calendar, so we always reconciled that a little bit. But really around that 4, 5, 6 month mark, some restaurants faster, some restaurants slower. Mm-hmm. That's where you saw the consistency. That's where I really started to feel, okay, this restaurant, this market, this region, whatever, it's quote unquote fixed. It's on a good trajectory. Right. Then it became about the staying power to keep it there, because it is what our guests are saying, and it is their sentiment. It's how they feel about our brands, right? Whatever brand anyone on this webinar happens to be with. And if you've accepted that and you have a culture of that and you act upon that and then you take initiative behind that, then ultimately you should improve that. But as human beings, we get accustomed to things very easily. So I'll give you an example of value. So the brand had a very long history of very, very high value scores. No matter what particular service we were using to measure that by, right? We had high volume scores, really favorable prices, competitive prices, huge portions, great food, okay? And still does and will long into the future.
All the boxes were checked.
All the boxes checked, right? All the boxes checked from the traditional, I know, you got marketing in your background, from a traditional, value, experience over price standpoint, okay? And it's like, hey, value's great, value's great. So we go on this journey and we take some of what's kind of led up to us spending this time today, and the trailing 12 months of all the graphs going like this in food and in service and everything else. And then value starts to go like this. And it's like, wait a minute. Like, as long as I've known, if service is good and food is good and speed is good and cleanliness, which to your earlier comment was very poor and heavily focused on after the pandemic, and cleanliness is good in our guest perception, isn't that all the stuff that makes up value? Like, how are value scores going down? It's just, it's not intuitive, right? So long story short, the natural go-to, I think, for a lot of leaders, regardless of the department you're in, is what else has happened during that time? Inflation, commodities have gone up, price has gone up. So the easy answer is to say, oh, we tipped over the cliff of price, right? We must be too expensive now. And that's not the case, because still great portions, great food, great price with respect to Huddle. So you and your team, by using other pieces of the tool, and I'll give you all credit for this for sure, helped us dig into, okay, well, wait a minute. You're right. It doesn't make sense. What else could it be? Right? What else could it be? And so started to look at all the potentially negative value sentiments along with our marketing team. What else might have been there? And we got some really good insights from that we do provide a great value. Huddle provides a great value to our guests and our consumers, but we don't talk about it. We didn't have to anymore, we thought, and we didn't talk about it. So now you get some initiatives and some strategy behind the marketing side of the business. And then from a pure operating side of the business, it dawned on us that we're 7-8 years removed from a remodel. So small value negative, and they mentioned no music, or small value negative, and maybe one of the TVs didn't work or something like that. There's opportunity there. So then you pivot and you deploy resources to go fix these things, and you stay on top. And following that little journey, sure enough, our last QBR review we had, quarterly review, value went back up.
Yep. I love what you're saying here when you're talking to marketing, because a lot of times the marketing and ops folks maybe don't really get along necessarily, or the marketing and the finance folks don't really get along necessarily. I don't know what you're talking about. No. But so tell me about how this maybe helped with that in the breaking down those silos, right? I mean, having one voice of the conversation, being focused on data. You mentioned before it being a leadership top down. Maybe talk a little bit more about instilling that and driving that within your culture.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in reality, that's heavily, leader and people driven at the foundational level, right? It's having a good team, having synergies amongst the team, and everyone kind of moving towards a common goal. But it's a bit of a give and take. And then in my experience, and I've had the pleasure of working with a lot of great finance guys and CFOs, and by some nature, that tends to be more of an analytical role, right? So that tends to be prove to me the data's right. Prove to me the data's right. So collectively between the departments, from a leadership perspective, it's like, hey, we're all trying to do the same thing here. The data's right. Let's go prove why the data's right. We really ended up doing a couple different initiatives. From an ops perspective, we did some ops simplification. We realized that the workforce has changed. We realized that, the skill level has changed in our markets. We're employing younger people. That gets into workforce intelligence, not guests, but that kind of coordinated along with that. And so, without running along here, essentially we took a look at each segment of what was driving the food, whether it was prep, whether it was flavor, whatever it was. And we focused in on the outliers. And the outliers became a mix of difficult to prepare products, or perceived to be difficult to prepare products.
Right.
Some operational simplification that could help improve speed, and hot food hot, cold food cold, basics of the business, right? So it helped guide our systems that we modified into the restaurants. It helped guide our training tools, and it helped kind of drive some of those initiatives, which ultimately led, along with a lot of hard work by, other departments in marketing and R&D and the chef over there. You really kind of take that holistic approach, and it paid off in improved food. I mean, I will tell you that we were not in the top quartile in food. We weren't in the top quartile of food, and I'm happy to say that the brand got there, and I have no doubt that with the leadership over there, they're going to continue. So,
yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, I love the use of sub-classification, because it's so important to be able to really dive into what you can change and what the guests are saying. The social data is really more about like indirect feedback, right? It's unsolicited feedback. So it's not necessarily you're going and asking these specific questions for what you want to know from your guest. It's what your guest wants you to know about their visit, right? Exactly. So tell me, before you had this platform, I know that you guys were really just very focused on surveys. That was your number one source of data. Tell me about the I don't know if it's, what's the right word for this, like the journey of going from one to the other, or how you had to maybe change your mindset. Tell me a little bit more of making that adjustment.
So look, surveys are good, right? Surveys have value. They can provide you with a lot of good insights, but I think the journey started with us just wanting more insights, right? So whether anyone on the call is operating a brand that has a large portion of their transactions generated by a loyal customer base, or whether you have a lot of new transactions coming in, or if your sales funnel's leaky at the bottom, whatever the case may be, surveys can add value, right? But it, from my point of view, it hardly tells the whole story.
Right.
And while it's valuable, it's also, a little bit risky in that you dictate the questions. So in some cases, depending on the focus of the team or the group, you can end up potentially creating a situation where you are looking better than you really are because of what you're really asking for. If surveys are low and you're giving away food to get more surveys, right? Then what surveys are you getting? Again, they're not bad. They can be very good when they're used properly, right? Any good tool, when used properly, can be good. I just think it has a higher probability of not being used properly. Conversely, the data and insights that come from all the social media websites and all the data that you all aggregate, that is reality. Got to agree with it, but it's reality. That's what the guests are saying. That's what the customers are saying. Period. Right? I got a 19-year-old daughter. What she puts out there is what she believes. That's it.
Yeah. Yeah.
And across all these different platforms, and that's the way the world is. And so it became we had all the conversations. Can you manipulate Google Star? Can you not manipulate Google Star? Can you do this? Can you do that? You work through all of those conversations, and you end up at the same place, right? Low guest metrics, low social media, bad comments, stores underperform. Good. Outperform, period, right? All you got to do is then use that information to get it there. Again, surveys can be very good. They can be very helpful. You can get a lot of good data out of that. But like I said, to me, it doesn't tell the whole story.
Yeah, I agree. And, something we've actually seen start maybe evolving a little in the survey space is that they're no longer like the 52 questions that they used to be, right? And they've shortened so much. But we've actually had a few customers actually go to, tell me, would you come back and tell me about your visit? And those two questions, not leading, so to your point of like not seeing skewed data necessarily about what you want to hear. It's really about, again, what they want to tell you, but maybe potentially in another, like a more private select type of channel. Because that's what really this platform is supposed to be. Is you guys have always been known for your service, the diner-esque type with the great pies. So Huddle House has been, I should say. So when you saw those service scores slipping, what was your reaction like?
Well, yeah. After I cried for 3 days.
Right.
No, that was. You're right. The brand always has been, and I'm sure will continue to be based on that. It operates in rural towns. The people that live there go to the same churches, the same schools, the same grocery stores, and so on and so forth, right? So that service, that connection with the guest is unlike any other brand I've experienced, to be honest with you. And I think, honestly, because of that, we may have gotten more credit than we should have historically.
Yeah.
Now,
Okay.
that's not to take away from anything that we
Sure.
or my predecessors or anyone there now has done historically.
Right.
It's just, I think it's a nature of that relationship, right? So when we started to see that slip, it wasn't just like, oh, the metrics are slipping and we're coming out of the pandemic or we're understaffed or all the different reasons and rationales that you can hear from your field ops teams to say, well, here's why or here's that why. It's like, no. We have a fundamental problem here because this is what we're good at. This is a foundation of our brand promise and what we've always been able to do. It should never go down, right? You know, if you're understaffed, your store gets a little dirty, okay, I can get my head around that. But that doesn't mean you stop being attentive. That doesn't mean you stop being nice to people.
Right.
So what's going on there, right? Let's dig into this. So and thankfully the brand had a really strong foundation of that. It wasn't a big heavy lift to get it back, but again, it's just really taking the data and paying attention to it and reacting to it without rationalizing away why it might be happening. I think it could be easy for leaders or operators to say, okay, we've gone through this journey. We've gone through the great resignation and all that kind of stuff, right? Now it's a little in the past now, and staffing levels are coming up, and that's why my store scoring low in cleanliness in my region or my market.
Right.
And that's okay, right? But if you have that culture and that focus of not accepting it and wanting to fix it and not chasing the score, then you're going to be able to impact the result in that guest experience. And look, for us, you know, it's like, hey, the restaurants are dirty. Well, you know, we're understaffed. No, we dig into the details. All we had to do was bus tables.
Yeah.
That was it. I mean, for you remember this, right? It was like dirty table. Our tables, no, they're not dirty. They're not dirty at all. We just got to bus it, right? We just got let's bus tables. So that became a theme at a regional meeting 2 years ago about bussing tables. Let's make that a focus. Another one was that you and your team had call outs in the past of manager not visible. And for those that don't know the brand or the Huddle brand, they're open kitchens.
Right.
How can the manager not be visible? They're like, you step in the door, there they are, right?
Should be
so
there.
Mentally, that's what you're thinking. You're like, they got to be visible, right?
Right.
And it was a function of, again, the staffing at that time, and that person was having to fill other roles. So we made effort and initiatives to focus on that and getting them out and getting them to talk to guests again, which again really helped drive the service score. So those are probably two of the things that really drove the service and the ambiance score, was those two focus areas.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that you mentioned the manager score. And so for those that don't know, part of the engine that we use is if somebody comes in and they talk about in their experience, they talk about, the manager came by, or the manager didn't accept my coupon and was rude, or was able to help me out. We're able to provide a score on that, again, down to that unit level, so you can train and help support. But that is actually one of our leading indicators of a brand's health. If you see your manager score going down, it is not a good sign, because it means that your folks are either way too busy and they're in their back room and they're not visiting their tables, which means they're out of touch with their, within their four walls, or they're totally stressed in the back and they're doing, expo when they shouldn't. That's not where they need to be focused or whatever. But they are not interacting with your guest, and that score does go down. So I know I think I remember having this exact conversation with you a few quarters ago, where you were able to really just, again, empower them to do what they need to do.
Yeah, we did. I remember that conversation. And look, it's an old saying, but it's accurate. The general manager is the hardest working role in our business and the most important. They're just bottom line. They're the most important in the business. And we had put, I had put some roadblocks in the way to having them be able to do that. And it was like, nope, that's me. We got to remove these roadblocks, period.
I love that.
And let them go do what they're good at and what they need to do, because look, it's a fundamental. You got a great manager, you're gonna have a great restaurant. You got a bad manager, bad restaurant in the story.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. We always saw that kind of in our turnover data as well. Not kind of. We also saw that in our turnover data, but then to align that all with the guest metrics as well, it was like, oh yeah, no, this is how it works. This is the service model. This is how it works.
And going back to part of the earlier conversation, that's part of, one of my favorite things about putting each of those kind of pillars together is you see the whole story, right? It's not just, well, here's guest metrics, okay, but here's financial data as well. Oh, wait, here's workforce data. And you tie that all together across one restaurant or one district or one region. And look, for me, it was pretty difficult to argue against. Okay. All right, yep, it's fact. Let's go. So.
That is how it works. And, difficult to argue, like when you get down again to that store level, we've had customers that, well, let me back up. Your operators cannot be in every unit every day. It is like your field team cannot do that. But what they can do is monitor the data that comes through as if they were there every day, because they're reading what the guests are seeing who are in there every day. And we had one guest or one customer that every time they went into this restaurant, everything was perfect, right? Everything was great. But the data on the other side showed that they were definitely prepping for those visits and not, that wasn't the life they lived. And so we had a situation where they were like, we need you to just, dot the I, cross the T. This data is good. And we're like, yeah, what's going on? They went and closed the restaurant. They were like, no, we're not dealing with this anymore. Your guest metrics are so bad. You're absolutely not up to brand standards. We're done here. And they closed the restaurant. And it was, of course, a dramatic moment, but it was for us. We were like, yes, this data does matter. This is how this works. We want everybody to get better. So it's always kind of fun to see that. So one of the questions that came through was talking about kind of off-premise and on-premise, and that's something we have not touched on, but certainly I know something that we saw in the data. And for the data, we are able to separate out on-premise and off-premise in a few different ways, right? The easy way is it's a survey that's tied to a specific, online ordering. And so you're able to fill that out. We know it is an off-premise survey. The other way is if they say, if the guests, when they give their feedback, they say, I went and picked it up. I got it to go. I got it delivered. I got it, whatever. So then those are kind of key terms that we then put into the off-premise bucket. So we are able to see that. But he makes a good point. He says, just like we're talking about with the manager, a smile can go a long way for a guest recovery. But then talk about what it was. It's more difficult to resolve a messed up off-premise order when they're already home and pissed off that they didn't get a fork or whatever the issue was. How did that data, because, again, you're continuing to filter that data. Did you treat the off-premise data differently? How were you able to, kind of rally those troops?
Yeah, you know what? We did in some respects, and we didn't in other respects. So let me give you an example. To say the evolution of off-premise and what we've all gone through over the last couple of years was not challenging would just be stupid to say. It's challenging, and the lasting effects of that have been a challenge as well, right? But you kind of already mentioned it. Let's use the example of delivery, and without jumping into what systems and procedures and process and this rack and that rack and put it here and do this checklist and figure this out and do the bag tag and all that kind of stuff. Forget all that stuff, okay? To not overanalyze it and just make it quite simple is treat. We made an initiative. We had conversations around. Listen, your third-party delivery driver is your customer. Smile at them too. Treat them right. If they got to wait for food that you're preparing, offer them a drink. They're your off-premise customer, right? And the reason for that is, I think internally and in talking to the managers in our stores, it's like, oh, look, I made the food and it sat here for 30 minutes, and that's why my scores are cold on off-premise. Okay, that's probably accurate, right? Sure. Logically speaking, that's probably true, but why did it?
Right.
Why was it late? Why was it that way?
Yeah.
And just having that kind of mindset where when you looked at the data, look, most of the cold quotes in quotes came from off-premise orders. It's that distribution, especially when you're talking about a waffle and eggs, like in that business, right? Yeah. Like they don't hold temp particularly well compared to a foil wrap burrito, for example.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So
all of our French fry customers out there are going, yeah, we know we French fry, yeah.
yeah, French fries, right? So it was to treat the off-premise as you would a dining guest, essentially.
Yeah.
Outside of the systems and the procedures and some of the more technical things that you can do we did to improve it, and the tech that you can do to improve it, it was, look, They're your guest. They're just delivering it for their friend. That's all. Think of them as the friend picking up the food, and treat them as such.
Yeah, I love that. I think that this whole webinar can be summarized with kindness matters, and it'll improve your service scores. I think it's important. So, well, just thank you again for doing this. We've seen Huddle House make such a transition over time, and we've been rooting for y'all as a brand. In fact, I remember when Perkins and Huddle House came in, Huddle House was like kind of the stepchild, like, well, we don't really want to talk about that. And Perkins is so great. And then you guys really were able to rise up and do wonderful things, which I know will continue for them. And I know wherever you go next, you will also do wonderful things.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Lessons from the Field. If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to subscribe, rate, and leave us a review wherever you listen to podcasts. It helps others like you discover the lessons and grow along with us. For more resources, insights, and behind-the-scenes content, check out Black Box Intelligence in the show notes. Until next time, keep learning, innovating, and delivering unforgettable guest experiences.